Hey everyone, welcome back. The process of getting your student through the process of deciding which colleges to apply to and getting those applications submitted can seem incredibly confusing and daunting. And that's before you get into the financial aid process. And while most people are familiar with the most common financial aid applications, a lot of families don't realize that depending upon the schools that your student applies to, they could be required to complete sometimes 2 or even 3 financial aid applications all at the same school. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is going over the different financial aid applications that you might come across with your student and what you need to know about each, so that way you can maximize your student's aid and put them in the best position possible to afford college. I'm Mike Bink, founder and president of Equivest Financial Advisors and founder of Beyond the 529. The financial aid process can be very complex, and positioning your student properly can save your family thousands of dollars. So if you'd like help understanding that process and navigating it to ensure that your student is positioned properly, please make sure to click the link in the description below to learn how you can become our client so we can walk you through that process hand in hand and ensure that your family doesn't pay a penny more for college than you absolutely have to. So let's get into the main financial aid applications that you're going to come across as you go through the process. Application number 1, and by far the most common application, is what's called the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. As you can tell from the name, the FAFSA is free to file and is the primary application that's used by the Department of Education to determine whether or not a family has financial need at the schools they're applying. Currently, the FAFSA becomes available on October 1st each year, and it has to be filed each year your student is in school. When your student is filling out the FAFSA as a senior, you can send the results of your aid application to up to 10 schools automatically. It's important to note that the FAFSA gets completed primarily by the custodial parent or parents, but it has to get signed by both the custodial parents and the student. Even if you don't think that your family is going to be eligible for need-based financial aid, I always recommend that you fill out the FAFSA, because doing so is going to allow you to get access to the best federal student loans with the best rates, but then also programs like work study if your family's eligible. The FAFSA uses what's called the federal formula for calculating a family's EFC, which directly impacts how much need that family is going to have on a school-by-school basis. As I mentioned before, you'll need to complete this application each year your student is in school, and it can be found at thefafsa.ed.gov. Application number 2 is called the CSS Profile, and it's offered by a private organization called the College Board. Just like the FAFSA, the CSS Profile becomes available on October 1st each year. However, instead of using the federal methodology for calculating your family's EFC, the CSS Profile uses what's called an institutional formula. The CSS Profile could be found at collegeboard.org. While not as common as the FAFSA, the CSS Profile is used by almost 400 schools. If your student is planning to attend a CSS Profile school, it's important to know that you're going to have to complete the CSS Profile in addition to the FAFSA, not instead of the FAFSA. Unlike the FAFSA, the CSS Profile is not free. You have to pay a filing fee for each school that you submit it to. Overall, the CSS Profile is going to be more detailed than the FAFSA, and it's usually going to be less favorable for families. The CSS Profile treats certain categories of your financial life differently, such as if you own a small business, or if you have home equity, or if your student is coming from a divorced household. One of the biggest differences that the CSS Profile has from the FAFSA is how it handles assets and income for non-custodial parents from divorced households. The third financial aid application I want to talk about today is more of a methodology than an actual application. It's called the consensus methodology. So whereas the FAFSA uses the federal methodology and the CSS Profile uses the institutional methodology, there's a group of schools that use what's called the consensus methodology. These schools use the consensus methodology, which is very similar to the institutional methodology. However, it's really meant to eliminate a lot of the subjectivity or professional judgment that certain universities use when deciding what types of need-based aid to award certain families. Financial aid application type number 4 are school-specific financial aid applications. As I've talked about in some of my previous videos, there's unfortunately no standard set of rules or guidelines that schools use when it comes to determining financial aid or admissions. Every school is able to make up their own rules and make up their own decisions on how they want to admit students as well as how they want to distribute their financial aid. So many schools will use a school-specific application in addition to either the FAFSA or the FAFSA and CSS Profile. In general, school-specific applications are going to be more cumbersome than the FAFSA and will often result in a higher EFC than either the FAFSA or the CSS Profile. So when you and your student are deciding on where they're going to apply, you want to pay very close attention to the rules and information that the school provides, because this is where they're going to tell you whether or not a school-specific application is going to be required and what the deadlines are. If you want a deeper dive on some of these financial aid applications, check out some of my other videos like FAFSA mistakes to avoid, where I go through all of the things that you want to make sure to remember when you're filling out the FAFSA so that your student doesn't jeopardize any potential need-based aid they're eligible for. For more tips and videos to help you lower your cost of college as much as possible, all while protecting your family's retirement, please make sure to click on the subscribe button below, along with that notification bell to make sure that you get alerted to weekly videos as they become available right in your inbox. Thank you and good luck going beyond the 529.